Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Learning Tech Talks. I'm here once again with our friend and host of the show, Christopher Lind. How are you, Chris?
I am doing well. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest, we're actually joined by Nick Howe, who's a Chief Learning Officer at Area9 Lyceum.
Nick, everyone.
Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm very good, thank you.
Thank you. We're all over the world today, are we? Where are you tuning in from today?
I am in Los Angeles, California today.
Nice.
So we got West Coast, we've got Midwest, we've got Europe.
Yeah. So
London.
Unfortunately, it's not too early for you guys and not too late for me, so it's perfect.
No,
for
this is
everyone.
the perfect time.
Well, look, thanks so much for joining us, Nick. Before we jump in, tell everyone a bit about yourself personally and sort of your journey to where we are today at Area 9.
Without spending too much time, it's been a strange journey because I'm kind of in the most people-y part of business that you can get. It's all about human development. But I started out as an engineer, and I'm kind of an engineer by bent and by training. So I'm a chemical engineer, worked in petrochem, moved into IT, did all kinds of things. From there, got into running professional services for a big IT firm, and that was my first toe in the water with this whole education thing. And owned our customer education business. Decided I liked that more than anything else I'd done. So kind of spent 15 years as a chief learning officer at Hitachi, and saw the good and the bad of the corporate L&D space. And then 3 years ago, made the switch over to Area 9. And I guess we'll talk a lot about that in the course of the next hour.
So I'm curious, right? So you've been on the corporate side of the house, and I'm always interested when people move from the corporate side over to, as David James put it last week, the dark side. Right?
Yeah.
So what took you on that journey over?
Yeah, well, it definitely is the dark side. There were all these friends that I had that I used to be able to phone up and chat with, and now they say, "What are you?"
They're like, they don't take your calls.
Don't want to know you anymore.
No, they don't want to know. I'm a vendor.
It's so funny, right? It's actually we're laughing about it, but it's a real thing, though. As soon as you move away,
it is. I'm a
vendor now.
What took me over? It was frustration. I mean, so part of it was, I'd been in big corporates for 30 years, and I was looking to do something different. But the real impetus for it was just a big wake up call I got in round about 2013, when I was looking at what we were doing as an organization. We were spending, more than $10 million a year on education for the organization. And it was award winning, and everything on the surface looked like it was really good.
Yep.
But I was worried on a couple of fronts. One, just as a business leader, because my background was not in HR. I came out of the business. So as a business leader, I was worried that if my CEO phoned me up and said, "So what am I getting for this $10 million you spend every year?" I might have to dance around that a little bit, because I could talk about how much we were doing, but I couldn't really talk about impact, which worried me a lot. And then the other one, which was, I think, as important, was I knew that we had this massively heterogeneous audience in the organization. People from all kinds of backgrounds, different industries, different tenures, different needs fundamentally. Yet we all know you have to deliver training at scale. And the compromise that you make is, therefore, you do one size fits all, or as I used to refer to it, as one size fits none. We were pushing out the same programs to the entire global sales force, for example. And even though I knew they had different needs, I couldn't service those needs. So I set off on this, what has now been a 7-year journey, to try and figure out, how do I solve those two problems at the same time? How do I demonstrate impact and know that I'm making a difference? And do that in a way that meets the needs of individuals. And that led me initially to being a customer of Area 9, and then to come over and join them.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, and I think one of the things you brought up there that I think is really important in learning and development is it's easy to get caught up in our activities versus the outcomes. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we're doing so much stuff. Look at all this stuff, and we got this award for this, and we're so busy.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, we're like, right, but what did we get out of that? And sometimes it's easy to kind of go, well, I guess we don't know.
Yeah.
So with that, Area 9 Lyceum, I'm familiar with it. I know what it is, but tell me and anybody watching just the elevator pitch of a little bit, what is it?
What is it?
What is it?
Yeah, well, and my job is to tell people what it is, so I ought to be good at that.
All right, good.
We will see how I do. So we have spent, as an organization, 20 years looking at how do people learn, and more specifically, why don't people learn? Okay. The organization started out when two doctors came together to look at why do physicians make errors in practice, and what could you change about the way that medical teaching happens so as to avoid some of those preventable errors. And over the years, we've been able to apply that same philosophy to pretty much every industry and every type of learning and development. So fundamentally, what we do is create software that allows training to be personalized at the point of consumption, so as to create much better impact. And the underlying kind of causes for that are, if you study the literature and you look at what works in human development, how do people learn? Pretty much the best possible way of learning is from a personal tutor. If someone can guide you and meet your individual needs, you will learn much more quickly, and you will learn much more, and through that process become much more self-aware. The trouble is, not everybody can have a personal tutor, and certainly in the corporate space, it's almost impossible. So the challenge that we set out to solve was, can you create the impact of a personal tutor, but be able to do that at scale for a price that isn't going to break the L&D budget? And so that's what we do.
Okay. So that's, and I know I haven't gone through it, or I have gone through it. It's a different experience. And I think that's something that, if you've gone through one of your Area 9 courses, it's not what people may be used to, in terms of, because getting to personalization, I think in our industry, we've always aspired to that, but I think technology hasn't always allowed us to do it, because it sounds great, but being able to give everybody a personal experience. So how is it doing that? I mean, under the hood, right? We were talking about testing before the show, but if we were to look under the hood of Area 9, what is it doing? And then we can kind of translate that to the user experience, so that we can say, okay, this is what the machine's doing. This is how, as a user, they're actually experiencing that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's helpful just to define what we mean by personalization, because it's one of these terms that gets used.
That's true. That's a buzzword, right? Adaptive personalization. Your take on what that means, so we can set the bar straight.
There are kind of two main definitions of personalization from my perspective. One is this whole Netflixization of learning, which is the thrust of which seems to be, how do we figure out what topics might be relevant to you? In the same way Netflix is trying to figure out what film might you like, the personalization thing from that perspective is, you're doing this role, or you've been with the company for this long, or you're just being onboarded, therefore these things will be relevant to you.
Okay.
That is not what we do. That arguably is a relatively simple problem to solve, because a lot of it is just driven by metadata. You can throw any kind of technology at that and solve it. The much more difficult problem to solve is, once you've decided that you want to learn something, or someone has decided that you need to be proficient in something, how do you make that happen in the best possible way? Given that we are all unique, we all have different needs, we all come to it. So you and I, say all three of us decide we want to get better at podcasting. Well, clearly
we definitely want to do that.
Very different.
Yeah.
We all need to do that.
You make a course on that.
we come from very different starting points. And so it would be mad to think that we could all just take the same course and suddenly we'd all become proficient. So how do you, in as simple a way as possible, be able to take that definition of proficiency and then deliver it to each of us in a way that it optimizes the experience for us? So the way that we do that, and you alluded to this, Christopher, is that, unlike almost every other training approach out there, regardless of whether it's instructor-led or traditional online, where they are really content delivery mechanisms, right? The goal of the instructor is to get through that one day's worth of content and hopefully answer a few questions along the way, but they're going to get there. And even with branching e-learning, there is a series of content and you will take a somewhat linear path through it.
Yep.
Well, why should we bother serving you up content that you already know, first of all? Because we're just wasting your time. And surely the point is not just to deliver content, it's to actually help you learn something. So the way that a tutor would do that, and the way that we do it in software, is by intermixing questions or assessment items with the content. So the goal is that we are constantly trying to figure out, what do you know? What can you do? Are you understanding the thing that has just been shown to you? And then making a real-time decision as to what is the next best thing. And I think the simplest analogy is just to go back to that tutor thing. It's easy to get wrapped up in the software, but the underlying concept is very simple. When a tutor turns up to your house to help your kid learn math, they don't say, here is a math textbook, read that for the next hour, and then we're done.
Yeah, here's all the curriculums, go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah.
What they're going to try and figure out, all right, so what are we trying to master today? Let me ask you some questions. Let me set you some problems. Let's see how you get on. And then we'll get into the studying part of it. And as we go through that, let me try and figure out, are you actually learning what I'm trying to teach you? If we hit a roadblock, is there a different way that I can try and help you understand this so that we can make the best use of the time available to us? I don't waste time teaching you things that clearly you're already proficient in. And I can help you when you struggle, so that when our time together is done, you've made the most of it. You've made the most of it.
We've made the most of the time.
If you encode all of those techniques into software and then sit the content on top of that software, that is essentially what we are doing.
And I think practically speaking, if you look at some of the other ways we've tried to do this in the past, maybe, right, is, you know, maybe we took the quiz from the end of an e-learning or something like that everybody just smashed through just to get the pass, and maybe we drop a couple questions in. But the challenge with that is it still doesn't change the content, right? It's still, you go through it, you maybe get a question, you still have to go through the same thing. And so what you're describing then is, and we're getting to adaptive learning, is that based on your responses, based on what it's assessing that you know, it's now adapting your journey and only giving you what's relevant or what you need to be able to achieve the outcome, correct?
Yeah, it's basically turning that basic e-learning concept on its head. You know, almost every e-learning course anybody has ever taken serves you up some content and then asks a few questions at the end of it.
Yep.
If you just flip that 180 degrees and you start by using questions to try and figure out where people are, and then in real time decide whether content is relevant or not, but then keep going with those questions. So one of the other misconceptions is we're not talking about a pre-test.
Yeah.
Right? The goal is not answer some questions and we will decide whether or not you need to take this course. That is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. All of the learning science, one of the things which is kind of crucial to the company and why I joined Area9 in the first place is we're not a buzzword company. Everything we do is based on the scientific literature. The scientific literature is very clear that what you do in the moment really matters. And so we are constantly trying to evaluate how well are you doing? How well do you think you are doing? And we'll get onto maybe some of the Dunning-Kruger things in a little bit. How well are you actually doing? How well do you think you are doing? And then at this point, should we try and assess you a little bit more, or should we serve up some content? So basically, we're taking pretty much the same e-learning content, the same content and those same questions, but just using them in a very different way, which means it's, from a development perspective, it's not that disruptive. You know, we're not completely tearing the world up and starting from scratch. It's the same content that you used before. We've just got really intelligent ways now of using that content instead of just throwing it at you and hoping that it sticks.
Yeah. Can I ask a question quickly, Christopher?
Please.
One of the things that I saw on your website, which I kind of stood out to me, is that you talk about how you track the confidence and the competence of each user. And I was like, wow, okay. Tell me more.
That's the Dunning-Kruger part, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know you just referred to that, but that's something that I don't see often in a lot of your competitors, and I think that never comes up as something they claim to be able to track and give you feedback on and analytics.
This is it's an unfortunate truth, and this was the big wake up for me. This 6 years ago, this was kind of the epiphany that I had. My opinion is it's an unfortunate truth of learning and development generally, both in universities and in corporates, that everything we do is based on a couple of fundamentally flawed premises, right? One is that if we put content in front of people, they will somehow magically just learn it.
Yep.
And then the second one is that people know what they need to learn. It turns out that both of those are fatally flawed. And for the second one, there is just this massive body of research that says human brains are almost designed to trick us. Right? Everybody believes that they are better at doing things than they actually are. There must be something about, on the savannah 4 million years ago, there must be something about that was beneficial to survival. The trouble is now, and 4 million years later, it's really problematic, and you can just Google this. It's kind of come into common usage fairly recently, but if you study any kind of population, if you're at a party and you ask people, how good a driver are you? 80% of the people in the room will say they're above average.
Chris can drive a Tesla.
Yeah, it's like an in-joke right now between us, only us three.
Yeah,
only us.
But by the way, for everyone listening, Chris doesn't have a driving license, so that's why they're laughing at me.
But it's something which is built deep into our cognition, that we overestimate our ability to do things. And the really problematic thing, in particularly in the corporate space, is that the worse you are at something, often the less self-aware you are about your ability to do that.
Yeah.
And you massively overestimate it. And anybody who's listening to the podcast who's a manager or who's looked after people and who's delivered a performance review, you will know that the people who are most surprised are worst grade too. What do you mean I only got a 1? I'm amazing.
I'm amazing at this.
You're not. You're just
and
not
on the other
self-aware.
side, though, right? And on the other side, when those leaders and managers get feedback from their employees, it's the same thing. Because I remember when I just became a manager and I got my review, I was like, really? That's how
I'm not perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Confidence plays a huge role in it. So one of the things that we try and do to help the learning process is ask the learner to self-evaluate. How well do they think they know something? And that does a couple of things. One is that simple act of self-reflection makes you provide a much more accurate answer. But secondly, it gives us information about your current state of cognition, which we can then act upon. Because there's a very, if we go back to the original e-learning example, you throw a question at the end of it and you get it wrong. Well, there are two very different scenarios there. One is that I get it wrong, but actually I wasn't sure. I didn't think I knew it, and I was just kind of guessing it. That is very different than me saying, yeah, I know this. I'm absolutely, I got that. And then I get it wrong. But we treat that traditionally as an identical problem. And clearly they are two fundamentally different problems that need solving. So the ability to get the learner in real time to reflect, and then for us to capture how well they think they did and compare that against how they actually did, is hugely powerful in our ability then to go on and help them learn something.
When you're combining that, right? I've seen tools in the past where they do just the self-assessment piece, but like what you just talked about, that's incomplete, because if you're not benchmarking that against what do they actually know, it's really a false read, because you're saying, well, yeah, you think you're great at this, but we really don't know what your skill set's at. So I assume that you're combining that with the actual, okay, yeah, here's what you think, here's what actually is true, and then you're putting that together.
Yeah, and then the real magic, of course, is that response is noisy, because we can't necessarily just take what they say as being a true reflection. I'm going to say I know it, even though I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And so the real intelligence in the models this is not branching, right? We're not saying you got it wrong, you said you were confident, therefore go there. It's much, much more subtle than that. And so we're running those responses through algorithms and looking at that pattern of behavior longitudinally as well, and then trying to figure out over time what is the best way for us to help you learn, and making corrections in real time. And I kind of hate to use this analogy because it's an overused analogy, but it is the best one out there. And it's really like applying Google Maps to that learning process. So my analogy is that traditionally learning is very much like paper maps. It's been around forever. It served its purpose for a very long time. It was the best we could do.
Doesn't update.
But nowadays, if you want to get from A to B, then how often are you going to reach into the drawer and drag out a paper map? You're not. You're going to bring up the phone because it knows about traffic. It can help you if you get lost, right? It gets updated in real time when road closures happen. And that's my analogy for the way that adaptive learning compares to e-learning. E-learning is very linear. It can't adjust if you get stuck. If you go off the reservation, it has no clue that you've done that, and it can't help you get back on. The goal of adaptive is we know you are going to struggle. We know you are going to get lost. Therefore, let us build that into the learning process so we can help you be successful.
Well, and what you brought up there is something that I see facing resistance in our industry a lot, is that what you said is right. We did the best we could with what we had in the past. And I think sometimes people jump to the extreme of kind of bashing what we did in the past, and then people get defensive and they get really feisty about like, well, you're saying what we're doing is wrong. And it's like, no, it's not wrong. It was the best we could do at this time. And this is where I think digital learning is transforming this. We're able to do things we couldn't do in the past.
Absolutely.
We're able to do things we wish we could have done, but either resource-wise, just capability, scalability-wise, we just couldn't do it. And now some of these technologies coming out are allowing that, because and I'm curious on this because you hit on it when you talked about the algorithms. You talk about all this data you're capturing from someone, that level of analysis on it, there's got to be AI running on that, because that's just more that you can't have a coordinator in the background looking at, spreadsheets going, okay, well, Nick answered this and all this. So, right. So I know you talk about AI on there. I have to assume that is a big part of where you're investing in your AI, your algorithms, and that learning that's happening there.
Yeah, it is. But again, AI is one of those terms that gets thrown around.
Another one,
it's a big one, right? It's another big buzzword.
And so, without going too far down the rabbit hole, so yes, you are right. You do need a lot of computational power to do this. So this idea of adaptive learning has been around for 30 years or more, but it's really only recently that the ability to do these calculations in real time in a very user-friendly way has come to the fore. So we talk about adaptive learning as being the convergence of computer science with cognitive science to do that. And interestingly, pretty much everything we do happens in the browser, right? So we're not, although we serve up content from the cloud, those calculations are happening in real time in the browser. And that's one of the big moves forward. You can now do things in the web interface that were just unthinkable even a few years ago. So that's one. The second one is kind of in the general milieu, people think of AI and machine learning as being the same thing, whereas machine learning is, preaching to the choir here, but for the uninitiated, machine learning is a very small subset of this broader artificial intelligence construct. And certainly from our research, and we have some very, very smart people working on this, more than 2/3 of our company are software engineers. So we are very heavily biased towards software engineering. There are a number of companies out there, a number of startups who think this is a machine learning problem, that if we get a lot of data from learners and then we feed that into some kind of machine learning algorithm, it will be able to figure out what the right thing to do is. It turns out that there are two big problems with that. One is the data sets are often not large enough, right? And again, one of the examples I give is, how much is Netflix spending on its it's machine learning algorithms to try and make recommendations for you. And how good are those recommendations, right? Often not
that great. Yeah.
Not that great.
And they've got a ton of data.
They're spending huge amounts of money on that. So I think anybody who thinks, oh yeah, I can just get a little bit of learner data and throw it into machine learning algorithm and the world will be a happy place. Yep. There's a bit of a wake-up call. And the second one is that the human brain is very noisy. And what we've found is that even if you have a lot of data, it is very difficult to get those algorithms to converge in ways that truly meet the needs. And so yes, we use AI, but what we use are algorithms that have evolved over quite a number of years that are often still handcrafted and hand-tuned.
Okay.
But they work, right? I mean, that's the good thing. We've trained something like 20 million learners. We've got 20 billion data points that we've been able to run through the algorithms. And those algorithms are getting smarter over time as more and more people take these types of training. We get more edge cases.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is we've now got to the point where these algorithms are sufficiently robust that, we teach 5th grade students, 10, 11-year-olds, all the way up to folks at the end of their careers. We teach physicians who are becoming board certified, and we teach pretty much every domain that you can think of. So the state of the art is now to the point where pretty much any subject for almost any age is amenable to these types of adaptive learning approaches.
Well, and I know when we'd first met and talked about having on a show, that was one of the things when we started talking about, okay, there's a lot of noise out there about adaptive learning. A lot of people are saying, oh yeah, our platform does adaptive learning. And when I asked you, is that, what's your big competitive differentiator? That was really what you talked about, was the accuracy and the ability for your platform to be able to do that very well, because other people might be able to do adaptive, but back to your Netflix analogy, if what it's adapting isn't actually very accurate, then it's all for naught.
Yeah, and I come at this from a position of a customer, right? So I was a chief learning officer. I had thousands and thousands of employees that I was responsible for developing. And when I was first looking at this adaptive learning thing, my first kind of binary decision point was like the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm. Yeah. So I had to make sure that whatever we were going to do was not going to accidentally create a worse learning experience for someone.
Yeah.
So part of evaluating this whole adaptive learning space was understanding, are you actually able to meet the needs of this very broad range of people that you can't predict in advance? I don't necessarily know what people need. And therefore, I have to rely on the software to be able to make those adjustments in real time, regardless of whether I am a new hire in Tapland or I'm a salesperson or a doctor who's been working in that space for 30 years.
Yeah.
And that's the real trick.
So two follow-up questions on this, because I think this is something that I've been interested in, and I'm curious your take on this, is that a lot of times in learning and development, and even back in my education days, we can sometimes fall for the myth that everything's people don't know something. And sometimes it's just, you just need to do something.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the capability of Area9, it's not a tool for every job, right? Because sometimes it's just, I just need to get something done. I just need some support to get through it. I don't need to build out my knowledge base. What are some, and we don't have to go super deep, but what are some practical use cases where, hey, this is really a good problem for this tool to solve? And what are some where you'd go, no, adaptive learning does not make sense. It's overkill. To try and throw it at that is not a good use of time and resources. And you're better served with a job aid than a whole adaptive learning experience on how do I get into my HR system and, file an expense report.
Absolutely. So several comments on that. So one, it is not a panacea. Absolutely. And I think anybody who claims that, you should probably stop talking to them.
just end the podcast right there.
There is no substitute for good requirements definition.
Yeah.
So not everything is a learning problem, first of all. And then even if it is a or not even a performance problem. If it is a performance problem and a learning problem, then the example you gave is one of the best ones. Is this something that I need to remember and know how to do, or is it something I can look up and get performance support in real time? Again, there is one of the fears with this whole adaptive learning thing, it's going to take our jobs away, we don't need instructional designers anymore. No, you absolutely need all of that practice, right? The worst sin you can commit is trying to solve the wrong problem.
Yep.
Or throwing technology at a problem that doesn't exist or didn't need it in the first place. So what it is good for, a general statement I would make is that excuse me,
there you go. Take a drink. It's fine. This was a big question. It's a big question.
If you can teach it online, then you can teach it better adaptively. So if you have made a decision, and often that's a question of scale, first of all, and you've made a decision that it is something that someone needs to become proficient in, regardless of whether that is knowledge or skill, right? It's something I need to know or do. And regardless of whether that's, I need to deeply understand this so as to be able to perform this well, or it's simply, I need to know that at this point, I need to stop and look at this checklist. Right? If you have made a decision that someone needs to be proficient in something, then I would argue that by personalizing that teaching, you're going to get an order of magnitude better impact than if you don't.
Yeah.
So that's a very broad generalization. Now, having said that, there are some things that are still better done in the classroom. There are some things around group interaction, around role playing. There are certain aspects of mentoring, but it has surprisingly broad applicability, and often best used in a blended environment.
Well, and I think what you're getting at, right, is the know piece, right? If it's a problem of knowing something, that's really where
it is. Well, so that's the default, right? Certainly, if it is knowledge that you're trying to teach, whether you're trying to teach someone about a product, whether you're trying to teach someone about a policy, whether it's compliance training, whether it's understanding a safety situation, whether it's the basic knowledge you need to be a doctor, right? Yeah. All of that is kind of low-hanging fruit. You should absolutely teach that adaptively. We're doing some work with a major publisher right now on the US medical licensing exam, what they call USMLE. It's how you become a doctor. That is something like 60,000 learning objectives, right? Just a massive body of knowledge. And we expect our doctors to kind of know everything. You expect to be able to go in there with almost any problem and expect them to somehow recall, oh, yes, I recognize that and I know what to do about it. Fun fact, we train a lot of doctors. We talked about Dunning-Kruger earlier. Yeah. We measure this thing called unconscious incompetence, where I think I know something, but in fact I don't. The average level of unconscious incompetence among doctors, as measured by us, is something like 18 or 19%. So 1 in 5 things that practicing doctors think they know with confidence, in fact, they are wholly or partially incorrect.
I felt like that when I go to the doctor sometimes.
Absolutely.
You just made a whole lot of doctors mad, Nick.
Yeah, well,
there's been times where I've actually gone to the doctor and I've been like, actually, you're wrong on a particular subject, and I'll be like, this is what, and they're like, oh yeah, actually, you're right.
But now you know you've got a 1 in 5 chance that you're right, Chris.
Yeah, well, a quick sidebar on that though.
Love it.
And this is where we kind of get into the learning part. It's not a criticism of them. There are very good reasons why they may hold those misconceptions. They may have been taught that at medical school. Research might have evolved. And that's the big difference between adaptive learning and testing or exams. Mm-hmm. The goal of an exam is to do a check at the moment to see how well do you do, and almost by definition give you a passing or failing score. The 100% goal of adaptive learning is to help you learn. So we want you to become more self-aware. We want you to admit when you don't know. We want to help you become self-aware of things you don't know so that we can help you get better. And that is certainly applicable across the knowledge domain. But it also applies to skills. Now, it is typically more difficult to teach skill online, but ultimately, where this is going to go in a few years' time is that certainly for some of those skill items, the convergence of AR and VR with personalization. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want. You want the immersion of being as close to the work experience as you possibly can be, but you also need to be able to meet the individual where they are. But for the time being, as I say, if you can teach it online, apply adaptivity to it, it'll make it better.
Well, and I mean, I can just say from my own personal experience, right? There's nothing more frustrating. This is what we deal with in L&D all the time. There's nothing more frustrating as an end user being told you have to go through stuff. If you're like, I know this, like, or I'm already, here comes my annual training that I have to take again this year that I took 6 months ago, and I already know all this stuff, and now I'm forced to go through that stuff. So with that though, here's another little shift in this, and you mentioned it's not a panacea, and I think that's where fundamentally we do have to look at this, and this is where the whole concept of the ecosystem of how you do this comes together. Is yes, there's that knowledge piece, but how do you balance that, and maybe how do you work with that action oriented, okay, now you know all this stuff, we have a really accurate assessment, we've given you the information, but at the end of the day, there is still that if you don't put it into action after the fact, it's either lost or it just goes away. So how do you work with organizations to kind of help balance that so they don't go, great, we've got adaptive learning, we put all our stuff in there, everybody knows this stuff, so therefore we must be so much better at it? And it's like, well, maybe not.
You ask some really good questions.
These are the hardest ones.
My brain is going in 17 different directions. So let me just say one thing first of all. So again, as a chief learning officer, one of the things I never defined us as a training organization. First of all, the goal I saw, our goal of organization was the best use of company capital to build capability. Right. So at that point, if you can't answer the question, am I actually building capability, then you probably ought to go and reevaluate what you're doing for a living. But you're right, it's all about then putting that into practice. But first of all, you do need to know that people are capable of doing that, right? Because otherwise the practice doesn't matter. So first of all, have you actually got evidence that people are at least capable of doing this thing? And then how do you go about putting that into practice? So there's a couple of different dimensions to that. One is that you can build into the online approach, into the adaptive approach, what we call activities. So where people are actually demonstrating knowledge of something or are practicing something. It might be a simulation, it could be whatever it is. And that may well be peer reviewed, so you're getting some kind of cohort interaction. But there is then that on the job component, because ultimately, as you say, Christopher, that's what matters. Are people actually behaving differently, which is ultimately where we want to get them to.
Right.
So not an easy problem to solve, but you can make some inroads into that. And one of the ways that we've approached that is, so I've now got evidence that you are capable of this. We're going to watch you perform something in practice.
Yeah.
So whether that is a salesperson doing something or whether a doctor doing something, whatever it happens to be. And as I author the adaptive learning experience, let me tag some of those things as on-the-job based tasks.
Okay.
And that gets then automatically spit out into a little on-the-job assessment tool. So now as a manager or as a coach or as a subject matter expert, I can, or even just from an individual learner's perspective, we can either grade someone on how well they did. That was a really poor interaction, or you knocked that out of the park. You were really good at asking those open-ended questions, whatever it happens to be. Or just let the employee or the learner self-reflect. How well did I think I did against this rubric of, I should have, oh, damn it, I forgot to. But then collect that data feed that back into the adaptive engine, and then let them go back into that experience. So now the adaptive engine, as well as knowing what I struggled with when I was first learning, I've now got information about how well did I actually perform on the job. And it can go in and help reinforce and focus in on those things that I struggle with. So now we've got that full closed loop. Now you can still do, that doesn't replace job aids or whatever else performance support might be needed. And it doesn't eliminate the need for a manager to be supportive and all those types of things. But at least it is providing that closed loop feedback between real world application and behavior and the things that we're actually trying to teach someone.
Okay.
Nick, how do you go about helping companies when you're onboarding them personalize the platform to their needs? As that sounds like is it a lot more work than the traditional approach? Because it sounds that way.
No, there's nothing. There's almost nothing needed. It's because the beauty of all of this is, when you use Google Maps, you don't care about all the stuff that Google has to do in the background to make that work. You've got a super simple user experience. And that's what we've tried to do with adaptive learning. Right? We don't want the technology to get in the way of creating those learning experiences, because we are not a content developer, generally speaking. The platform is used by organizations who are developing their own content. So whether I'm an airline that's training pilots or ground crew, or whether I'm in a hospital, whatever it happens to be, then it's their content. And so we want to make sure that we remove any barriers they might have to getting that content and making that as a powerful learning experience. So there is no customization, there's no tuning of the algorithms, there's no optimization of the algorithms. You author the content in a way that looks like any other authoring system, pretty much.
Okay. You
add some assessment items to it, which you would probably have to do anyway if they were just normal summative questions, but you author. I'd argue, admittedly, a few more questions, because we do want to try and get
with yours, you
very
more
good
questions.
Data. But at that point, you're done. Right? I don't have to worry about what if this happens, or I've got this type of learner, or
Okay. So as an organization, it's not up to us to figure out how all this stuff works, but there is an element of change in that. You talked about the fact there's authoring tools in the so you're authoring content in the platform, and then are you supporting organizations through that? Because that is a bit of a transition.
That's what I mean.
There's got to be a little bit of, if you've got a team of people who've developed e-learnings with the assessment at the end, and now you're saying, no, that's not how we're thinking about it.
Exactly
that's a mindset shift, and I have to imagine you got to help orgs through that.
It is, and there's a maturity curve that people go through, as you would expect. The good thing is the delta is remarkably small. There are no unique skills needed to create these adaptive experiences compared to non-adaptive. You just have to apply those skills in a slightly different way. There are probably two or three major things that you need to adjust as an L&D function. So one is that you do have to think more about what it is you are trying to create as an outcome, right? Unfortunately, a lot of training today is very content-centric. I've got a PowerPoint, I'm going to wrap it in some kind of thing and throw it out. And we call that learning. Well, no, that's content delivery. Don't fool yourself. Content delivery. So part of it is, if you are doing good instructional design, you're already there. But it really helps if you are stepping back and thinking, what are we actually trying to accomplish with whatever it is we're going to roll out? So that's number one. Number two is the ability then to break that down into granular chunks. It is much more easy to assess whether someone could pull the right lever than, how do you assess, can you drive a car, right? That's a very complex assessment. It's much more easy to say, do you know how much brake pressure to apply in this situation? So the more granular you can make it, the easier it becomes for the adaptive engine to work its magic. And then the other unfortunate truth is it's very easy to write bad questions.
Yeah. From all the years we've been doing it.
All the years. True, false. Well, that's a 50% guess right there. So don't do that.
Don't do that.
No, don't do that.
We've got these 3 really badly written answers and then this one super long paragraph that sounds actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So which one is it?
Chris, the short answer to your question is something we call learning engineering. Okay. So part of what we offer to all our clients as we work with them in this process is, first of all, let us build the first one for you. Right? We will work with your content. We will work with your subject matter expert, and we will show you what best practice looks like.
Great.
But then as part of that, we're going to onboard you through this process. And if you're already doing good instructional design, if you already know how to write good assessment questions, you're 95% of the way there. There are a few little things about the platform. One of my frustrations with a lot of e-learning, and particularly with EdTech authoring tools, is they've made it easier and easier and easier for non-learning professionals to create bad content.
Yeah.
And so part of it is just unlearning some of those bad practices. But what we've also tried to do, one of the other interesting things about adaptive is it's highly interactive. So second by second, minute by minute, you're self-reflecting, you're answering questions, you're responding, you're looking at content. That is very engaging as a process. So a lot of the things that you might typically do in non-adaptive learning to try and make it more engaging are not necessary with adaptive learning. So it can actually be simpler to create adaptive training than it is to create non-adaptive, which is somewhat counterintuitive.
Okay. Nick, I'm sure everyone's thinking in the comments, could you give us an example? Could you share some stuff with us?
Yeah, absolutely. In
terms of a screen share, could you share something on screen? Yeah, I was like...
So let me try and we'll see if we can do our Inception thing again. All right. So let me set that to full screen.
We can see it, by the way.
Ivan worked his magic. We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Yep.
All right. Let me zoom into this a little bit. So a very boring screen, I must admit. Not a lot there, but we're inside the authoring platform. And I've got 2 different modules. So those of you with the European bent will know about the GDPR regulation.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Very exciting.
Cutting stuff.
Cutting edge data privacy regulations. And I'm going to use this as an example, but don't get too hung up on the fact that this is kind of dry knowledge-based content. What I'm going to show you, the exact same things apply to almost anything you can think of. So let me just open up the editor and we will see, again, let me zoom in a little bit here. This is typically how most sequential courses get built, non-adaptive courses built. You've got some kind of intro, you've then got a series of pieces of content, which are going to be combinations of images or videos or whatever they happen to be. And then you throw in a few questions at the end of the module to see if anybody learned anything. And you just create this simple, linear experience. We're all familiar with that. So if I look at the adaptive equivalent of that, well, it kind of looks the same, right? We've got a tree of learning objectives that are laid out sequentially and linearly. We've still got that same content that we had before, and we've also got the questions that we had before. The big difference is they're now intermixed. So I've now aligned the content with some one or more assessment items and aligned that to the learning objective, the thing that I'm trying to get the learner to master, whether that's knowledge or skill. But as an author, I still go through that same process.
You're following the same process as
the authoring tool is very much like any authoring tool. I've got templates. If I want to build out multiple choice questions, I can create new answers. I can mark them right or wrong. I've got all the typical drag and drop multiple choice ranking. I can create videos and all those types of things that you do in any other authoring tool. So the magic is that I can still author in the same way and I can still author sequentially. But the magic is then what happens when I use that. So if I launch that sequential, that adaptive version of the course, oops, let me just hide that away and make this full screen.
Companies, organizations.
Pause that. So as with most e-learning courses, you open up with some kind of intro, some kind of video, whatever it happens to be. But now I'm immediately starting to get questions and problems. And then, so it's checking to see, do I actually know anything about GDPR? Before I even show you any content in this situation, do I know anything? And how confident am I? These are those confidence buttons.
That's how it works with both of them there.
Right? So I can say, yeah, I think it's that. I think it's those two. Well, actually, no, you're wrong. So here's some immediate feedback. Oh, and by the way, here's some content. And the coach is also suggesting it over here on the left-hand side. If you want to look at that, please do. But we're not going to force you at this stage, because we do want to, although the adaptive engine has control of everything, we do want to give the learner agency. We do want to give them some control over this experience, them a little bit. Right? Because otherwise they just get, particularly as adults, you get very frustrated if you can't do that.
Right.
And so, okay, I've now got some feedback, and the system's going to say, all right, now here's some content. Take a look at this, and this would be your classic course. We're going to show you some content, and then you're going to do next. Well, here we're actually going to say, is this something you think you already knew? Do you believe you now understand it? That's additional fodder to the adaptive engine. So I'm going to say, okay, now I got it. And now it's going to ask me a question. Now, the order that things happen, if I just bring out the table of contents, so here is the structure of the course. And again, don't get too hung up on the fact that this is GDPR. This could be anything that you're trying to do. This could be anything. The system is making a decision about, where should I go next in this course? Should I go back and cover something that you've just seen because you got it wrong, or you struggled with it, or you weren't as confident as you should have been? Should we maybe jump ahead a little bit and see how you get on there? Should we show you some learning content? Should we use another problem? And so essentially what you've done is handed over, although the developer created this sequentially, the order that the learner interacts with it is going to be based on how they interact with it and the responses that they give, such that, and up in the top of the screen here, you'll see this red progress bar. This is not how much content have you seen. This is how many of the learning objectives have you demonstrated proficiency on to the satisfaction of the adaptive engine. And so our job is to get you through all the learning objectives, regardless of whether you need to see the content or not. And so you and I can answer the same question in the same way, but then depending on how we did when we hit next, that is completely under the control of the engine. So we can answer the same question in the same way, but it will take us somewhere else.
I was just going to ask, so on this one, because I'm thinking about this from the end user side. This is a shift as an end user, right? So if you're used to getting assigned a course and you're just like, I don't really like, I'm mashing the next button until I get to the end so I can get 80% and pass this. And now all of a sudden, oh, I actually have to sit down, pay attention, and actually engage in this content. That is that can be a bit of a culture shift for an organization. Like, what do you mean I actually have to pay attention to this compliance training?
Yes.
Have you seen organizations work through that? And like, does that cause some resistance for folks?
So again, this goes back to the comment I made earlier about first do no harm. And so I deliberately tested this before I made the leap to adaptive. As an end user, I deliberately tested this with what I believed was my most critical audience. Okay. And we've seen this repeated time and time again, that actually, I mean, there are always outliers, but in the 98% case, that is not what happens, because whatever frustration they might see with, oh my God, I've actually got to put some effort in here, they immediately see the flip side of it, which is this is adjusting without us telling them. I mean, this is the other big takeaway, I think, for the listeners. When we rolled this out to 10,000 users, we did not tell them, and when I was CLO, we did not tell them that anything was changing, because they don't care. It's a training course. Right?
We'd like to think they do.
Right. For us,
I love that. I love that point, though. Yeah, I love that.
It's adaptive. It's exciting. It's not.
They don't care. They just want to do it.
They just want to get on with their day. They just want to. It's part of their job. They know they've got to do it, but they want to get on and get out. So we didn't tell them. On a Friday they launched a storyline course and they took some training, and on Monday they launched an Area 9 course, and it was adaptive, because it launched through the LMS in exactly the same way. That's the other side. All the power, all the calculation.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask about it.
Yeah. So this is completely transparent to the way that you launch the content.
Okay.
So we just create a SCORM object, we drop it into an LMS, the learner launches it, and so they get this screen that you're seeing now, and it's like, oh yeah, it's an e-learning course. I hit the next button like I always do.
Okay. Now,
one of the things I will just say while we're on this screen, down in this left-hand corner is this little slider that goes from novice to expert. So ultimately, the control is under the power of the adaptive engine, but we do want to, we can't read the mind of the learner. Right. And so it could well be that I'm taking a course that I know I am a complete novice in. And so as a learner, I can set off to the left-hand side, and it will behave now much more like a course that they are used to seeing. It's going to show me content, and then it's going to ask me questions. Now, if I struggle, it's still going to loop back and forward and make some changes to it. But it's going to behave more like they expect it to. They're not going to get confronted with questions immediately. Conversely, if I think I'm an expert,
it's going to hit you hard on the beginning.
It's going to hit me much harder, and it's going to really, because what I'm saying is I should be able to demonstrate my proficiency and get out of here quickly and not even need to see any content. And so let me do that. And we typically see a 4-to-1 ratio in the amount of time difference between folks who really are competent and can get through these questions and answer them accurately with confidence versus those people who need a lot more support and take a lot more circuitous route in order to be able to get to mastery.
Okay. So it kicks you off Mount Stupid very quickly. If you say, hey, I know all this and I'm perfect at it, and you don't, like, bam, you're going to very quickly realize, oh, maybe I don't know it quite as well as I thought.
Yeah. And that, as I was saying, I let me just stop sharing that for a moment. Hopefully I can switch this back over.
He did.
The big thing that we found when we rolled this out to the audience was, one, they very quickly realized it was adapting to them, and they liked that fact. They could tell that it wasn't showing them things they didn't need to see, and they could get through it very quickly. And also, that self-awareness thing is very powerful. That, again, in the vast majority of people, they don't like being told that they're stupid, but if you help them become just self-aware of some of the gaps or misconceptions they hold, then generally that is a very positive experience for them, not a negative one.
Okay. Well, I know we're coming towards the end of the time here, but I think one of the things you hit on that is important is that, because one of these things, you hear these platforms, you're like, does this mean we have to go get a new LMS, or this is a new LMS, or we have a new, a new interface? It really is. It's a behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Right? It's a behind the scenes that then feeds into your existing, and it's more about, okay, as a learner, I go through the same channels I'm used to doing. It's just my end experience is better. Yes. So there isn't a whole lot of change management. No, we need to tell you how all this works. And
no, this is not a 3-year rip and replace. Oh my God, I need a new LMS type of project. This is, I'm going to build an adaptive module. It's going to take me the exact same time it would take to build a non-adaptive module. I'm going to drop it into my LMS, and then I'm instantly going to get the benefit of this.
Yeah.
On two significant fronts. One is the learners are going to see the immediate benefit because they're going to become more proficient. They're going to learn more quickly. They're going to have a much better experience. But secondly, we're capturing all that data. So now, from an L&D perspective, I have instantly instrumented my entire learning experience in a way that I've never been able to do before.
Because now I have more than just pass-fail data.
Absolutely. I'm now getting granular data on every single element of every single course. And one of my criticisms of XAPI is, great in theory, we can get all this granular data, we dump it in an LRS, and then we never have time to go and look at it. Right. It just becomes this repository, whereas with the adaptive approach, the algorithms are using the data in real time, so you're getting immediate benefit. Even if you don't look at it, you've got that autopilot that's taking care of all that analysis for you, but the data's there if you want to go and analyze it later. And often we encourage, this is that maturity I was talking to you about. We will work with customers to help them reevaluate their curricula based on the data that they're getting back from their learners now. Do we even need to teach this? What are the parts of the curriculum that are working much better than others?
Well, and I just see from my perspective, looking at that as being able to, because there's a lot of times we get hit with, oh, people don't know this, or they don't know any, and we can actually go back and say, well, they do. Yeah. Maybe they do, or yeah, you're right. Maybe they don't, or this is exactly where they don't. They know this. We can make smarter decisions with that data versus just let's peanut butter spread everybody.
And that was
everything
probably,
and hope it works.
Yeah, and that was, and this is kind of as we wrap up. That was probably the most powerful learning for me as I made this tradition to adaptive. We had a particular audience where we'd rolled out some training. They'd had instructor-led training and they'd had online training. And there was a general assumption that they had, they were proficient.
Yep.
For reasons I won't go into, we ended up then also putting them through some adaptive training. We found out that there was massive misconception in that audience because we were asking that confidence question.
Yep.
We found out that some people were 40% unconsciously incompetent. They thought they were doing the right thing for the customer. They thought they knew how to solve that problem, when in fact their knowledge was fundamentally flawed. And it was only when we got the adaptive data that we were truly able to diagnose what was going on and then remediate for that and correct it. And it happened, that remediation happened automatically. We didn't have to take an extra step to solve that problem.
Okay.
But my assertion is that many of the problems that occur in the workplace are not because people don't know something or can't do something. It's because they think they know it or they think they can do it. And particularly under pressure, people revert to stored behaviors. And if those stored behaviors are wrong, things are going to go wrong in the workplace.
Perfect. Well, hey, thanks so much, Nick, for joining us on number 2. We probably could just keep going, honestly. I could sit here and keep this conversation.
It's a big subject.
It is. But so if folks, are watching and they're just curious and they say, hey, I'd like to learn more about what's the best way for them to either get, in touch with you or with someone there to learn more about it.
Yeah. So my email is pretty straightforward, nick@area9.dk, which is a bit weird. We're a Danish company originally, so .dk. I'm also on Twitter, Area9Nick. I'm obviously connected to you on LinkedIn. Our website, Area9 Lyceum.com.
Okay.
But yeah, Google me. I've done a bunch of videos and webinars on this subject. It is at one extreme, it's incredibly simple. At the other extreme, you can dig into
it. Very deep.
It goes on forever. So it's a fun subject.
We'll link it for everyone listening on LinkedIn. We'll link everything in the description.
Yes.
And we've already in the description on LinkedIn, you have a link to our podcast platform where you can subscribe on any of your favorite platforms, whether it's iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud. Choose one that's best for you. You can do that, and we'll update the show notes shortly for you with everything that you have there. I'll be honest, Dick. When I saw on your website that you claim to be the most advanced learning platform in the world, I was a little bit skeptical. but now after this episode, you're taking me one step closer to being a believer. So
good. That's awesome. Well, thanks again, Nick, for the time. Really appreciate it. For everybody watching, we're doing a shift in days. So starting next week, we're moving to Tuesday. So we'll be back here next Tuesday at 10 a.m. with Scrimmage and talking about mobile learning. But that's the change there. That'll go through the end of November, and then December we're moving to Fridays. But look forward to everybody coming back next week. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I love the conversation.
All right. Appreciate it.
See you there, everyone. Bye.
Bye.